What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and after about a month and a half off, I am back and ready to record a patch rundown. So 9.22 is coming out for League of Legends. It is the last of the patches before preseason, which means in about 2 weeks, we're going to have a really long patch rundown. So that'll be fun. We'll deal with that when it comes. For now, let's talk about what's in this patch, as we are in the last patch of the regular season. G2 is going to win Worlds, and we're all going to make Diamond this season. Just in time. We got about 14 days. Okay, so the true damage skin line's coming out, including the Prestige Qiyana. That sounds pretty hype. Senna's coming out. That also sounds pretty hype. Senna seems pretty cool. Excited about the skin line. Excited to get into some of these games, and let's talk about everything else. You've got till November 19th at midnight Pacific time. I assume that time is slightly different based on what region you're in, but we've got about 14 days until it's over, closer to 13. Senna is coming out. That's pretty hype. I know I did record Champion Spotlight stuff for her, so hopefully that comes out. That'll be fun as well. But Senna looks really cool. Senna looks really cool. I'm excited about that champion. Should be fun overall. Support marksman. I think she's hype. And looking forward to that champion, playing games with my friends, and it'll be cool. All right, let's go into the actual changes themselves now that we're about a minute and a half into the video. Small Ashe nerf. Ashe is the highest win rate solo queue bot laner in the game. I'm honestly pretty surprised we weren't seeing more Ashe at Worlds. She got a couple of games, but we didn't see very much. I think with the queue being a full attack reset and everything else, I thought this champion was in a pretty good spot overall. Definitely seems powerful, definitely seems viable. And I tend to agree that in the few games I've played of Ashe recently, that the volley poke spam is really strong. Most of the builds that I've been seeing, she's not going Essence Reaver first much anymore. If you go Essence Reaver, you're not going to feel this mana cost change very much once you finish the item, which is not that late into the game. But it's certainly going to hurt your early laning. This is pretty meaningful. This will have an effect, let's say, a good 1% or so win rate. She will still be very strong overall, totally worth picking, totally worth playing. Just a bit weaker as a champion, seems fine. Again, she's going to stay well above 50% win rate, so totally you can grab some elo here. Next up is Blitzcrank, who is losing 10 to 30 damage on the Q. Another very high win rate support overall, very high win rate champion. 10 to 30 damage on ability max first is meaningful. I read some of the Reddit comments today before I did this video, and people were saying like, well, you don't die because of how much damage the Q deals, you die because of being pulled so far away. It's like, dog, how many times do you fight like a level 3, 4, 5, 6 Blitzcrank in lane? 20-ish damage there matters. This is relevant. Blitzcrank's actual damage output is relevant to his power as a champion. So here's the damage difference. It's about, 12 to 10%. Right? Again, it's 10 to 30 damage. This matters. This is another sort of, let's call it about a 1%, maybe 0.5% win rate drop. Again, this is a champion who is like first or second highest win rate across all bot laners, or all supports, Ashe for bot laners. So like, you could double this nerf and it would probably still be above 50% win rate. But honestly, Blitz the champion that seems to sit above 50 at all times anyway, and no one usually cares. So I'm okay with him just sort of chipping at Blitzcrank a little bit. Next up, some bug fixes actually went live in the previous patch, but hey, you always dash in a melee range. You could land inside some jungle camps with the Q. Whoops. Allies would teleport to locations. Whoops. Okay, but those got fixed 2 weeks ago, so whatever. Next up, some small nerfs to Xayah. Basically, the multi-hit damage against champions and monsters went down a little bit. Here is the math. And of course, keep in mind that because you get more missiles on the evolve, there actually is a larger nerf to the evolved Q. So 10% damage to an isolated champion. The less isolated they are, the less this nerf matters, right? Keep in mind, this is landing 5 extra bolts, which is doing, 125% bonus damage instead of 150% bonus damage. So 10% damage nerf, right? If 2 bolts fall off, this nerf, means less and less and less. When it's evolved, of course, you're not going to really evolve before level 9. But a 12% damage nerf there. As you can see, that's kind of like the maximum you're going to lose. I do want to point out this is an ability that has like 110 like total base damage at max rank. Like this thing only has good damage numbers when isolated. So hey, 248 is pretty reasonable for a single skill as a base damage. Now that said, she's frequently evolving it. This is just going to happen on the kit. And it turns out that 360 is a very, very high base damage. 407 is an absurdly high base damage for an ability. Now it's not always a solo hit, right? But certainly that, yeah, Evolved Kaisakyu does just absurd amounts of damage, and it does slightly less absurd damage now. One other thing to point out is that the AD ratio is nerfed to a similar degree here, so the scaling is also down 10 to 12%. And again, her wave clear is basically untouched, and the early lane trades are basically untouched. This is overall a pretty small nerf, but I do want to do one more thing to upset this a little bit, which is that your passive on Kaisa is missing health damage, which means the less damage your Q does, the less damage your passive does, so there is a little bit more to the nerf than maybe on paper, but this is not large. This is a very, very light touch to Kaisa, and she will, if there's really no like overall changes to the game, and obviously we know preseason is happening in 2 weeks, there's no huge changes to the game, Kaisa will probably remain a pretty top tier pick overall. Next up, a pretty substantial buff to Kalista. So the W mark, right, where I hit and my support hits, or vice versa, we get a bit longer grace window. That's nice. That's a good buff to her. But also a pretty substantial damage buff on the W. This is an ability that you tend to max last. So when you actually compare the damage output, we look at the far right side first. This is simply... this is the data table without the auto attack coming in, which is fraudulent, but it's here for posterity's sake. It's double damage in the early game. It's double damage for the first 13 levels, which, can go up to like 70-something damage. Even in the late game, it's still about 60 more damage. So this is a pretty substantial hit. That your damage is quite a lot higher. And then you kind of roll in the auto attack with it as well, using her base AD and the whole passive scaling thing, and it's still a really substantial damage buff. Her W-empowered autos do a lot more damage. And I want to point out, right, that like an ability that does 27 damage is a really crappy ability, right? Like even when you get up to level 13, where it's still only at 1 point and health bars are higher, it's an ability that does 75 damage. That is not a lot. That's really, really crappy. That's barely noticeable. It's less than one auto attack at most points in the game. So now it's actually respectable, right? It's 50 damage at level 1, which is about what your auto attack deals, right? It's roughly half of the total damage here. So finally, Kalista's in a value where it's usable, which is worth knowing. Also, it's kind of interesting to point out that like 10% max health damage is about what your basic auto attack does before armor and MR. Like that's worth pointing out. And even when it's up to, the absurd levels of 18%, and it's doing 300 something damage, okay, yeah, now it's finally well above your base auto attack damage. Congratulations, we finally got there. So yeah, I mean, on the one hand, this is a very, very large buff. On the other hand, it's finally a real ability now. So great. I also want to point out, by the way, that the level up scaling is weaker. It's 2% per rank instead of 2.5% per rank. That's fine. They're not expecting you to max this ability. It's still maxed last, but yeah, it's definitely worth putting a point into. It's going to help your early trades and good things. Next up, small nerfs to Kayle. Kayle is another very high win rate champion. Very, very powerful overall, so 10 to 30 damage off the Q, and 10 mana increase on the W. Pretty simple changes, but certainly very strong overall. You max Q first, or at least you tend to, so that's a solid 14 to 12%, and you get, the minus 30 pretty early on. Max W last, but when you consider the fact that 10 mana is 10 mana, yeah, who cares you max it last? It's still 10 mana more expensive. So this is pretty meaningful to Kayle. This is probably upwards of 1.5%. From my memory, she's still a very high win rate. She will remain above 50%. Very strong champion overall. Fair enough. Next up is Malphite. We were seeing some AP Malphite builds that were frustrating. So hey, 0.2 AP ratio off. All right, whatever. That's probably solid. I was not running into that myself, but probably worth doing. 50 flat damage off depth charge. We were seeing, of course, a ton of Nautilus support at Worlds. I don't think he's been too abusive in solo queue or anything, but 50 damage off. Fair enough. Apparently, they're saying that the win rate is actually too high sort of across all levels. So, okay. Basically, they're focusing this nerf on the damage that is more dependent on coordination. So they're basically letting the independent of coordination damage stay up. So they're trying to target his team fighting specifically. Sure, okay, fair enough. 50 flat damage, not gigantic. It matters though, right? I mean, this is a pretty meaningful damage. That 50 damage is pretty relevant in all cases. You can very often see Nautilus hit more than one target with the spell, so that can be 100 damage off in a team fight. Definitely meaningful, definitely reasonable to do this. So, okay, sure. Next up is Pantheon, who continues to find nerfs and probably still needs more, but the Q is going to do less damage to minions overall. The execute is going to come in less often, so that's wave clear damage down, that's executes down. Shield Vault, by the way, doing no more bonus dash speed from boots. I don't know really the like numerical movement speed of Shield Vault, of the W, of the dash stun, but I do know that the movement speed bonus from boots 1 was 100, and the movement speed bonus from boots 2 was 200. So it's actually a very substantial move speed drop. I could only guess the base move speed of the dash, so that feels fraudulent to like do a data table with made up numbers, but losing 1 to 200 move speed off the dash is really quite meaningful. This will be noticeably slower. You will definitely see and feel this. It will give his opponents a bit more time to flash out of range, or put on a spell shield, or get black shielded by a teammate, or something else, or for the rest of your squad to try to re-engage. So there's going to be some level of that. But to me, the big thing is probably just the wave clear drop. That's probably the biggest single change, is that instead of doing 80% damage, it does 70% damage to minions. Doing 1/8 less damage to minions is pretty big, 12.5%. That will actually mean something for his laning and everything else. Next up, bunch of small changes to Sejuani. Her overall auto attack DPS is going down. I didn't actually do the math in the health regen growth, I don't think. But also a buff to Q damage, 0 to 40 based on rank. I might have done this math wrong. And 0.2 AP ratio, plus passive now probably resets his buff duration when reapplying at max tech, which is a nice thing. So here is Sejuani's auto attack damage, which is +2, so it's a 3 to 2% gain, not gigantic. The attack speed growth is up 0.5% per level, which puts you up, about 6% more total auto attacks at the end, and the DPS overall is up 3 to 7%. So her ability to just like actually brawl you and hit you with her mace is up slightly. This to me feels very, very slight. Sejuani certainly gets some value through this change because you can start applying your permafrost a little bit faster to find that stun, but I think this is going to so scarcely matter, especially because base stat per level stuff is sort of backloaded the way that the stats are calculated. So this is very small. It's a nice to have, and around level 5 you've got, I mean the 2 attack damage sort of can matter pretty early on, and you get to like level 5 or something where you're not at Cinderhulk yet, and it's 4% more auto attack DPS. It's not nothing, it's not zero things, but it's not incredible, right? This is pretty small overall. And the other change is the Q. Okay, did the math right? Good. The Q does 0 to 40 more damage. Tends to max this second. I don't imagine that's going to change any, but certainly a pretty meaningful damage increase in the mid to late game. Right, only starts at level 8, really kicks in full scale around 13. AP ratio, not really going to matter almost ever, but I mean, certainly this is an absurdly low AP ratio, so, nice to see it go to a little bit closer to, meaningful. I could have gone even to 0.7 here, but whatever. It doesn't matter anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of like really small buffs to Sejuani that up her damage output slightly. Again, the math on this I didn't actually do. I missed that one. My apologies, but not a huge deal overall, I'm pretty sure. You're going to see a little bit here, probably about 1% as well. I know that like most of my changes, I'm like, oh, it's about 1%, just because these changes are all roughly that size and scope. It feels like this is really like, this would matter a lot if you were Ashe or something, right? If you're really auto-attacking a lot, Ashe doing, 6% more DPS in the mid game is really, really meaningful. But Sejuani is not auto-attacking you very much. She's not getting many autos off in a team fight overall, so it's just not that meaningful here. You can almost ignore these lines of text. You can kind of ignore these lines of text as well. So it's 1% or less is kind of my opinion here. So recently did some work beginning to address the difference between Sylas' power level and pro versus solo queue. Overall power level dropped as a result, giving him some general strength. However, we don't think we've entirely solved the issue. We'll be continuing work in the near future. Yep, so Sylas continues to be the problem child for balance. Unlucky, but that's just how it is. So he's going to gain about 3 MR, some early health regen, with it compensated in the late game, and 10 mana on the W. So basically, they're giving Sylas more sustain. In general, I will say that base stats tend to be good for solo queue versus pro, which is a nice thing here for, Sejuani as well, right? Like, here's base stats, here's power that everyone can achieve and make use out of. So Sejuani, another champion that was initially OP in solo queue and not good enough in pro, then that has switched to Sejuani having been very good in pro despite bad in solo queue, and so they're trying to like correct back to the center point again. So it's trying to get there. They will one day, and then we have Sylas doing some similar things. Health regen per minute is actually higher at all points in time, but certainly a lot higher in the early game, so way, way, way better early laning. A simple 3 extra magic resist is about 2% overall more magic durability. Cool, feels good. And the final change being the 10 mana cost off the W, the ability that you tend to max second, is reasonable and a 20 to 40% mana cost buff. So this actually adds up to quite a lot. Like this to me is a like more important base stat change than on Sejuani. So this is going to be overall a bigger deal. This is going to matter more. I'm going to give it maybe, I'm going to say like a good 2% win rate bump here for Sylas, because I think just your laning being better, and this is non-trivial, right? This actually multiplies that. You take 2% less damage and regen 25% more health, so you're like a lot better against AP damage in the mid lane, or magic damage in the mid lane, or wherever lane you end up playing. I think that's actually quite meaningful overall. So that's cool to see. That's positive stuff. Mana cost is going to help with the same stuff as well. Next up, finally, some more meaningful Xayah nerfs. This is good. Do want to keep seeing more of these. I know they made her squishier and less escapable. They didn't remove her from being the #1 most picked bot lane in competitive. Across all of Worlds, we're going to see Xayah picked or banned in every game of the finals as well. But a pretty reasonable 5 to 50% attack speed nerf. And that actually matters quite a lot. So here's that table with, of course, her base stats rolled in, because that's the right way to do math here. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty meaningful. 4 to 7% less DPS, right? This is, roughly as big of a nerf as the Sejuani buffs would have been to someone like Ashe. Now, to be fair, this is only a nerf when W is on. But keep in mind that Xayah has specific attack speed scaling on the kit. You get more feathers out oftentimes. And keep in mind that your even your damage per auto attack goes up on the W. So getting 1 extra auto attack off during the W buff is like even more damage than 1 auto attack otherwise. So this is actually pretty meaningful. You're in essentially a heightened state with your W on. So definitely meaningful. This definitely does matter. One thing I do want to point out is what I think is the best Xayah build, and is generally the most frequent Xayah build, is doing Essence Reaver and Infinity Edge and skipping the attack speeds of Zeal until 3rd item. With this nerf to the W, I think it's still the correct build, but you might start feeling the lack of attack speed, right? You get up to level 13, then it's 15% lower. This is, pretty meaningful. You have 7% less overall attack speed with that change, and that definitely matters. So, there's, you probably might see more Zeal second, more Rapid Fire Cannon second on this champion, which is a lower DPS build. So if you see builds change, the champion might get even weaker. Now, it might be that it is correct to go Zeal second now, but that's going to be one small learning point for Xayah, and we'll see. Players will have their opinions, and the data will show us something as well, and we'll see what happens. But definitely a meaningful change, one that definitely should have happened. To a certain degree, I almost wish that there were hot fixes for Worlds, like, giving this nerf to Xayah after group stage or something, right? Like, I think some of these things could have been done, right? The Pantheon nerf, the Xayah nerf, the Kayle nerf. I don't think this will ever happen. Well, I don't want to say never, but I think there is room to make that choice. I think if your changes are literally only 1 line of text, and they're never more than like 5-ish% of a champion's DPS, I would be okay with sort of Riot doing a and I don't know how they do it with everything else, right? Because like you have to patch the game for everybody else at home. You don't want to wait, and then your only patch is 3 weeks after World starts. You're like, okay, we saw planes, we saw groups. Quick, prep a patch, deliver it, patch the Tournament Realm, bug fix it, make sure it's ready to go, and then we're into quarterfinals. That feels, not the right choice. So I don't know if we can ever be in a world where this is right to do. And I think, once you're at semis, don't bother. There's only 3 matches left. And even between groups and quarters is maybe not the right choice either. So maybe this is never doable. But again, I don't want to say never. There's probably some way to finagle that. Maybe, but it's probably not worth. But maybe it would be. Because, I think a small Kayle Q damage nerf and some, Pantheon wave clear nerfs and, just like a hot fix that hits the top 5 champions, maybe okay. I don't know. Just a thought, right? Just a thought that, like, there's just a special, like, 9.19b that, like, only goes with Tournament Realm, and it's just, like, those changes. I could see it. That's all I'm saying. Okay, bunch of bug fixes. Caitlyn can't hit herself with Energize. Now knocks up enemies close to it on Or and R. Barrels no longer trigger noxious trap shrooms. Yeah. Game invites no longer disappear if the game owner changes modes. Urshi's Strike now breaks spell shields. Destiny no longer blocks projectiles. If it's interrupted, okay. If Tarek casts R and dies, the cooldown will now reflect the proper time and not reflect his W cooldown. That's a weird one. R now works properly consistently when enemy champions die during the cast. That's good. HUD icon now shows how many Dark Spears are available. That's good. Takedown basic attacks now properly deals damage to traps. That's useful as well to knock those things down in a second attack. When you cast out of range, it will now properly cast immediately instead of walking. That's a good change as well. I hate, like, super long range travel abilities that don't just go. And now attacks and structures work on Sejuani Q. Cool. And Herald Summon Trinket now properly has the 1 second lockup period that all trinkets have to prevent accidental usage. That's a good thing as well. Okay, so we did it. Congratulations. Small bug fixes. None of them huge. None of them going to warp the game. Awesome looking skins. Chromas for the awesome skins. And that's the patch. This is a short enough video, being 20 minutes long, and the last, 6 of it was a ramble that I think we're good without a TLDR. I will be back. Well, there's going to be a TFT one up around the time you finish watching this video. And I'm going to be doing some level of Legends of Runeterra content, because I love that game. And 9.23 is going to be huge for League of Legends, so YouTube videos ahoy. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.